E. Ethelbert Miller is a writer and literary activist. He's the author of 2 memoirs and several books of poetry, including the collected poems of E. Ethelbert Miller, a comprehensive collection that represents over 40 years of his work. For 17 years, Miller served as the editor of Poet Lore, the oldest poetry magazine published in the United States. His poetry has been translated into nearly a dozen languages. Miller is a 2-time Fulbright Senior Specialist Program Fellow to Israel. He holds an honorary degree of Doctor of Literature from Emory and Henry College and has taught at several universities. And I'll just, there's so much here, but Miller is host of the weekly WPFW morning radio show On the Margin with E. Ethelbert Miller, which, if you guys haven't heard that, is absolutely wonderful. And we've been posting links to that on our Facebook page, so I hope you get a chance to hear that. And producer of the Scholars on UDC TV. I could go on, but it means that we're waiting that much longer to hear Ethelbert read. So, again, I just want to thank everybody for joining us, and thank you so much, Ethelbert, for being here with us today.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I decided, you know, when you asked me about participating, I selected May 1st for a reason, and I selected it because it's the birthday of the poet Sterling Brown. And I'll put up a picture. This is a picture, if you can see, of Sterling Brown in his house. Sterling Brown was born in 1901. He died in 1989, but he was the first poet laureate of Washington, D.C., and he served from 1984 to 1989. And I always try to, you know, remember writers. And so the first person's work I want to read is Sterling Brown's work. I probably wouldn't be here sharing my own work if it wasn't for Sterling Brown, who I met when I was a student at Howard University. One of the books that you might want to pick up is the collected poems of Sterling Brown. And this was one that came out a number of years ago, 1980 actually, and it was selected by, the poems of Sterling Brown was selected by the Michael Harper. There's going to be a new version of the selected poems of Sterling Brown that's going to be put out by Northwestern University Press, I believe this summer, and that's going to have a new introduction by the writer Cornelius Eady. So it's something to look forward to. I want to read one poem by Sterling Brown. There are a number of poems which are sort of his signature poems. One poem which is entitled Strong Men, which usually he would end his reading with. At one time, I guess earlier than before I met him, he would end his readings with a poem entitled Old Lamb, which is another signature poem. And then many people know Sterling Brown because he incorporated the blues into his work. And his famous poem, Ma Rainey, is one that many people make reference to. And that poem, I believe, is very important because what you see Sterling Brown doing in the Ma Rainey poem is actually incorporating blues lyrics into his poem. And you know that when you talk about African-American literature, jazz and blues has a very strong impression on writers' work. Some people have a tendency of linking Sterling Brown to the Harlem Renaissance, which he really was not. He used to joke, some people used to say, well, you must have missed the boat. And Sterling Brown would say, no, I never went down to the dock, you know, in terms of, you know, being associated with the movement. And so I want to read this poem called Long Gone by Sterling Brown. I liked your kind of loving, ain't never caught you wrong, but it just ain't natural for to stay here long. It just ain't natural for a railroad man with an itch for traveling he can't understand. I look at the rails and I look at the ties, and here's an old freight puffing up the rise. And at night on my pallet, when all is still, I listen for the empties bumping up the hill. When I ought to be quiet, I've got an itch for to hear the whistle blow for the crossing of the switch. And I know the times are nearing when I got to ride, so it's home life and happy. Ain't no fault of yours, I was leaving. It's just that away. I got to see some people I ain't never seen. Got a highball through some country, which I've never been. I don't know which way I'm traveling, far or near. All I know for certain is I can't stay here. Ain't no call at all, sweet woman, for to carry on. Just my name, just my habit to be long gone. And that's definitely a blues poem. And I just like that word. The other thing I would mention in terms of Sterling Brown, you know, we call him the Dean of African American Poetry, literature actually. And in 1941, he produced this book here, The Negro Caravan, which is a very, very important African American collection because it's every genre is represented. But one of the things that this anthology really highlights is the importance of African American folklore. And so when you look at Sterling Brown as a critic and a social historian, along with being a poet, you can see why when the Washington D.C. decided to honor Sterling Brown as the first poet laureate of the city. The second would be Dolores Kendrick, who was also a very fine poet. So I wanted to read, you know, something by Sterling Brown because this is May 1st, and it's a way of remembering, you know, the writers that have come before us. Many of us are in our homes, and we've all have been affected by the coronavirus. Many of us have lost loved ones or know people who've lost loved ones. And when we talk about what writers should do during these times, it's what we're doing now. We have to make sure that we maintain what I call the cultural infrastructure. You know, as we see, you know, our museums closed and our libraries closed, just things that writers have to do. You know, some of us are homeschooling. But I think that if you're a poet, even without children, you better be doing some homeschooling right now in terms of just sharing things with other people who, whether they're in your neighborhood or people that you're online with. It's very important in terms of writers stepping up. I'm a strong advocate that writers should run for public office. And then I didn't have to be reminded of that by people like Sarah Palin running for office. But I just feel that, you know, when I look back, Toni Morrison could have been a senator from New York, you know. And there was a time when many artists, you know, ran for public office. You know, Du Bois ran for public office at one time, Belafonte. So, you know, when we look overseas, it was at one time where writers were leaders of countries. And I think that when we look at what has happened around the world, you can see that many of the writers have not stepped up. Many of the artists have not stepped up. And so now we're governed by entertainers and reality show people, but I won't digress. Here's one of the poems that I wrote, which I think gets at what I'm experiencing right now. This is called Rust. It will take time, more than clocks or sunsets. How will we remove the rust from our hands? How will we touch again? Is the language of love lost? Teach me Braille. I need to trace your nakedness into pleasure. One of my major concerns with what's going on right now is what I see as the loss of intimacy. You know, raising children where they can't embrace or touch. I think that gets away from us being human. You know, we are people in terms of, you know, we're communities. We are ones in terms of the capacity to love is something very human about that. And the social distancing goes against, you know, it's almost like the Tower of Babel again, you know, okay, we're speaking different languages, so now we're going to be punished for that. But I feel that, you know, there's a need for poets to write these types of poems because these are political poems. And to show you a very short poem, which I try to focus on intimacy, is a poem I wrote a couple of years ago called Those Little Acts of Love When There's Nothing Left. Those little acts of love when there's nothing left. She takes her half-filled glass of water and pours what's left into yours. I'll read that again. She takes her half-filled glass of water and pours what's left into yours. You know, that's the thing, you know, in the old days when you go into a restaurant, you knew who was married for a long time and who was dating. You know, some people are sharing their food and stuff. Others are like, I don't know where your tongue's been, you know. So what happens is there's a lot lost. But in this very short poem, you see what I'm trying to do is focus on this small little thing, which if you're not careful goes unnoticed. And that sharing is a sense of what I call intimacy. This next poem is called Black Men Are Precious. And when I read this, I had dedicated it to Elijah Cummings, Congressman Cummings. I also had dedicated it to Kobe Bryant. But now, because of coronavirus, communities like African American communities are heavily being, affected, and so this poem now expands to so many others. Black men are precious. Black men, Black friends having strokes. Black men younger than me. Good men with bad hearts. Men who did not follow their fathers into factories or the post office. Black men who went off to college and pulled themselves up by degrees. Men who did not sink into despair, but lifted their families into new homes. Black men who survived the bullets, streets, and police. Black men who saw the horizon and the stars. They marched as if Garvey held out his hand, not to Ethiopia, but to our hearts. Black hearts now failing for unknown reasons. Why? Why do we die so young? Why are we not like our grandfathers sitting on the porch, rocking away the years? Why are we not the Black men returning from the wars and lifting our girlfriends up into wives again? Why do we date this early death? After all the exercise and pills, after the changing diet, why is there such a cruel hunger that appears and takes our years? Black men, my friends resting in their open coffins, waiting for someone to sing Precious Lord and take their hand, Black hands closing with so much love still left to give. And that's Black Men Are Precious. One of the things I've been doing the last few weeks is I've been writing haiku. And that's because, like many, we're home, and I decided, let me spend more time in my backyard. And so what I've been seeing as a writer, it's just like I'm in a period of what I would call, I'm woodshedding. This is a good opportunity to woodshed, like Sonny Rollins or John Coltrane before he wrote The Love Supreme. You would go in and you would just be by yourself. And I've been drawing upon this because it's forced me to go back and look at my own family very closely. And the one thing which I've been trying to still understand is my brother's decision back in the early 60s to become a Trappist monk. So, here we are living, in our rooms and stuff like that. But my brother made a decision, at a very early age to go into the monastery. And I'm like, wow, he must have had a certain level of spirituality to say, okay, I can go into this place, take a vow of silence, and commit my life to, a higher being. And I've always been impressed by that. And that's what I've been thinking about these last few days, and what I've been doing is looking at nature, which is what the haiku form teaches you to do, make those connections. And I went back and pulled haiku, This Other World, by Richard Wright, because in his last years, he was writing a lot of haiku. And one of the things I have a tendency of doing is getting books and then sticking letters in books and forgetting that there's a letter in there. And when I open this book up, because now I'm writing these haiku, there's a letter in here from July 20th, 1998 to me, this is from the publisher, RK Publishing Company, that put out this book. It says, Dear Dr. Miller, at the suggestion of Ellen Wright, Richard's widow, I am sending the enclosed advanced reading copy of Haiku, This Other World to you. We will be publishing this book in late September, early October, but Ellen wanted you to have this copy now. So I found this in there and I said, well, I better get back to my haiku because, I got to uphold the tradition, But I say that in terms of one, Richard Wright, who's known for books like Native Son and Black Boy, and The Outsider. But, when you read the haiku, there's another side of Richard Wright. Now, some people said this was a time when he was, he was ill and he reflected on his life. But I think this was always there, that if you look at his relationship to nature, now it might be a tree that somebody's being lynched, but, he did very conscious of nature. And so I started writing haiku, and I'll just share you three that I've written in the last few weeks. I've written about 23, 24 of them, and I have a little book. See, this is the little book of E, a little book, and I'll read you the three short haiku poems. The cat wags its tail, rising it moves with such grace. Oh, hear the night purr. I'll read it once time again. The cat wags its tail, rising it moves with such grace. Oh, hear the night purr. The second one is sidewalks wet from rain. Clouds no longer wear their shoes. Let's jump the puddle. And this third haiku, how lonely my arms. Trees walk away from the wind. I now hold nothing. So those are just three poems. And if we were not going through what we're going through right now, I would not have turned to this form. But I think, you know, for those of us who are writers, we're always looking for forms that challenge us, that may be very timely. And I think for me to spend more time, you know, writing about nature, making these connections between nature and myself, I think underscores what we should be doing right now in terms of, as citizens, being concerned with global warming, being concerned with some of the things that we need to be focusing on. Like the coronavirus has made us overlook the terrible tornadoes and storms that have hit us, many of the states in this country, but just hasn't been covered, you know. And we know that when we, you know, look ahead, you know, there's going to be the weather patterns are changing. You know, if we were all in Australia, we know we were dealing with the fires, and these are the warnings. The same way the coronavirus, there was warnings. You know, we're going to have these sort of pandemics. We're going to have these type of things coming, and if we are writers, we may have to make sure that we stay abreast of these things and serve as witnesses in terms of our society and our world is changing. We have a responsibility. You know, we have to make sure that we speak up. And I go back to Ernesto Cardenal from Nicaragua, who recently died, and his poem Ecology, where he says that, you know, the trees and the mountains, you know, also, you know, crying out for change and stuff. And, you know, we as people have to, you know, speak up for them. And so that's one of the things that sort of guides my life. I'll read you some of new poems that I have here. And then I'll read some poems from If God Invented Baseball. And that's another issue, no baseball. Okay, I'll talk about that. You know, no baseball, okay, right? You know what it means? One thing about bringing things back to normal? No spitting, right? You talk about baseball players. How can you have a baseball game and tell somebody not to spit, right? How can you tell somebody in the bullpen they need to be 6 feet apart? In the bullpen, are we serious? You might as well stay in the dugout if that's the case. But all these things, you know, it's going to be interesting because sports gives us a clue in terms of how we live our lives. You know, and for some of us right now, we don't know what day of the week it is because there's no sports. Oh, my husband's watching the game. What game? You know, so it's going to take a lot. But here are some of the poems that I'll read before I get to baseball poems. Hell's Kitchen. When I was young, I overheard someone say, if it rains when the sun is out, it means the devil is beating his wife. I didn't know the devil was married. Who would marry a devil? It's sad to know too many do. It rains too often these days. Women trapped in homes being punched and slapped. Some raped into submission. Hell should be a woman's wrath. Every devil should be homeless. You know, one of the things that we probably know, which is very sad, we probably know right now with many of us confined to our homes in terms of sheltering, domestic violence has probably increased. You know, where a woman has nowhere to go. You know, there was probably situations where a woman was home and she was like, well, he ain't here now. Thank God for that. You know, but now he's not going anywhere. And then if you talk about unemployment, where people get into arguments because they can't pay their bills and the stress, just confined, you know, they've got 3 kids. Those things, even with good marriages, things begin to snap. And so, you know, as a male writer, I try to be very much aware you know, the women's voice. You know, I made reference to Sterling Brown being an influence on me in terms of, you know, thinking about being a poet. But when I look at coming of age as a writer, I came of age in the 1970s, you know, where you see what I call the feminization of African-American literature. So the writers that influenced me, you know, was the June Jordans and the Nsaki Shange and the Audre Lordes. Those women became very important to my voice. And I think women writers definitely affected many of the writers that came after the Black Arts Movement in 1960. So if you go to the theater and you see like Fences by August Wilson, you know, you see how the women character in that play. And I say that play because if you see it produced in the beginning of Fences, the two men are in the yard talking and the woman is in looking out the window. But by the end of the play, the woman is center stage, you see? And I don't think Ralph Ellison would have did something like that, or even Richard Wright. The women were always marginal. But you can see in terms of the 70s, changing this shift, okay? And we see that politically right now, there's a shift in terms of women's voices. And that means that male writers have to have a responsibility of responding to that and writing about issues that are not just simply women issues, but are also, you know, issues that affect men also in terms of family issues. I'll read a couple of love poems. Do you still sing in the shower? Sometimes the craziest thing you can do is love someone. I find my arms always outgrowing my sleeves. Once I stood in the shower watching my lover slip down the drain. When I reached for the soap, she was gone. I'm always waiting for a woman to come around a corner from somewhere and love me into forever. This is what happens when you live alone or don't own a car. You find yourself in the middle of the street, wondering why the shower at home doesn't work. Love is like water you can only hold for so long. And this next poem, Stop for a Moment, Let Me Talk. It's for my friend Naomi Ayala, my buddy. Stop for a moment, let me talk, is what Naomi always says when we talk about poetry or politics. So at the corner of 16th and Euclid, we end our argument the way Duke Ellington plays those first notes in a sentimental mood, just before John Coltrane enters. But this morning, Naomi is Ella, and I can see the stars come through my window. I'm going to catch the S2 or S4 home. I turn and say goodbye to Naomi, who turns her head away, and our friendship is scatting the way Ella left words behind. And these next two poems are about, one is about boxing. And sometimes as writers, you know, there are historical moments that you read about and you turn into poems. And this is 1947, the death of Jimmy Dole. He stepped into sugar when he stepped into the ring. The sweetness of the punch crazy against his head. He fell hard to the canvas like it was the bottom of a cup. Dole never saw daylight again. Robinson's glove blocked the sun. One could see death shadowboxing in the corner. This is 1947 when Sugar Ray Robinson killed Jimmy Dole. And they almost brought charges against Sugar Ray Robinson for Jimmy Dole's death. And when I was reading that, I said, wow, you know, that's a poem there. Let me sort of craft it because I didn't know that. And then this is Frederick Douglass, never played in the NFL. When he was young, when he was old, Frederick Douglass never smiled for the camera. He returned the gaze that made slavery weep. Douglass never blocked. He was a Jim Brown of abolitionists. He read, then ran. No slave catcher could catch him. They couldn't even read his narrative. Free people of color wanted his hair to kneel. Instead, the line of Anacostia refused. Douglass let his hair grow free. Early blackness never smiled. Douglass never knew the Civil War was simply halftime. In America, the country was not ready for a black quarterback, so Frederick Douglass never played in the NFL. You know, one of the things, this is all based, some of this is about Kaepernick, but some of this is about Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass was the most photographed man before 1900. He was like photographed so many times. In fact, there's a book of just Frederick Douglass photographs, okay? Like this, you know, it's like a Playboy for photography. But what happened, in none of those pictures do you see Frederick Douglass smiling. The other person who never smiled is Carter G. Woodson, who's responsible for like what we call Negro History Week and Black History Month. I have never seen a picture of Carter G. Woodson smile. It's like Black history is serious. Okay, it is very, very serious. There's a story about how one time Langston Hughes was working for Carter G. Woodson, you know, and Carter G. Woodson having like alphabetizing of all the Black members of the Black middle class in Washington. So you know, like something that prevents you from writing, you know. And so he had to go away. He told Langston, well, all you got to do is keep the place warm and whatever, you know, until I come back. And Carter G. Woodson came back early. And Langston had some people from the corner down in the basement playing cards and stuff. And he looked up, and like Carter G. Woodson just shook his head, like, and Langston felt he had let the race down, you know. But if you go back, you know, Douglass never smiled. And in this book, I have this line here: Frederick Douglass never smiled for the cameras. He returned the gaze that made slavery weak. Douglass never blocked. He was a Jim Brown abolitionist. Now, I remember, I'm not a Cleveland Brown fan. I think Dan McDade, who's on the line, you know, from Ohio. But what happened, I remember the quarterback, I think was Frank Ryan, and the ball was snapped, and it was a blitz. Jim Brown was standing right next to Ryan. And after the game, somebody asked Jim Brown, well, why didn't you pick up the block? And this is back then. Jim Brown said, they don't pay me to block. And that was amazing back then, that arrogance and stuff. And I said, you know, Frederick Douglass would have had to have that type of Jim Brown feeling in terms of, you know, dealing with Garrison or Lincoln or somebody, you know, just to get through the times. And so what you see me doing in this poem is sort of bending history, you know, and some of it is in a very, in terms of using humor. And I'll go back to Sterling Brown. It's just one thing I learned from Sterling Brown when I was a student at Howard. Even though Sterling Brown had many political poems, he also had many poems that incorporated humor, okay? And that was very important for a Black poet like myself coming through the 1960s, where we all felt we had to be like Huey Newton in a wicker chair, you know, like this, and not smiling, you know, and that. And so what happens, humor is very important, but at the same time, you want to make sure that you're not just grinning. You know, and that gets back to, you know, what I've learned from Frederick Douglass, who I never met, but I saw the pictures and I said, this guy is trying to uphold some sort of tradition. I need to at least, you know, catch the baton and keep going with it. And so that's why sometimes I have a tendency to being conservative around certain issues, but militant around others. Let's get to baseball, then we can have some questions. I'm going to read Pumpsie Green, because I like that name, you know. Now, my name is Ethelbert, and I always tell people that my father got to the hospital late, you know, and that's how I got my name. My father said, oh, I wasn't going to name him that, but anyway, I'm here, so let me see. But Pumpsie Green was fascinating, and I'll read this poem. Years before we decided to change our names and name ourselves, I held your baseball card in black hands and wondered who gave you the name Pumpsie. How unforgettable, as if Nat King Cole had decided to sing your name. You were the first Black player to play for Boston. I wondered about the ear's loneliness when you got a hit or the error someone made when calling you to bunt and run. How green was the Fenway Field before your arrival? Your name assigned against segregation, finally finding a place in the locker room. Pumpsie Green. What Red Sox fan mistook your last name for being Irish after being puzzled by your first? It's Pumpsie Green. Now see, now this is Pumpsie's Green baseball card. You see? Now, this shows you what's missing. Because of sheltering and all this stuff, there's no book tours, okay? I was in, this is called 2 years ago, I was in Albuquerque, New Mexico doing a signing. And a guy came up and gave this to me. I've got a Pumpsie Green baseball card to give to you, right? So I have my card. And then Pumpsie Green died last year. And I have, from the New York Times, a picture of Pumpsie Green. You know what it says in this? It says in this, in the New York Times, Pumpsie Green's mother never knew where the name came from. In the New York Times obituary, his mother can't explain where his name comes from. I think that's hilarious. Anyway, well, I keep him in the safe, but I thought that was so funny. I can't hear you guys laughing, but I think it's fine. I'll just laugh at myself. So that's Pumpsie Green. I'll read you about 3 more. The Bat Boy. The sound of ball against bone was still in my head when I went to get Gil Magoo's bat. The park as silent as a cemetery. The body of Herb Score cut down at the mound and lying limp. Did the world end on May 7th, 1957? It was the day MacDougall vowed to never play again if Score lost his right eye. I told my mom that night I didn't want to see another bat or ball. I had a fear of seeing blindness and knowing stars could disappear. There's always in sports an injury that is captured. I still remember Bo Jackson being injured on the football field, you know, but this was an instant in terms of you always watch games with which a batter hits a ball right back at the pitcher and he just happens to duck. But in this case, Herb Score, who was a fascinating, talented pitcher, got hit right smack in the eye, you know. And when I did some research, Gil McDougall, who played third base for the Yankees, was so upset that he said, I don't want to play anymore. You know, that it was just that tragic. And so I wrote the poem from the Bat Boy because somebody had to go out there and get the bat, you know. And this is where what poets look at things differently. For example, there were many poems after 9/11. And I remember I came across a poem in which the whole 9/11 was looked at through a dog searching for bodies. So the writer said, okay, I'm going to look at 9/11 from this angle. And he provided a different perspective. And that's what I think is the beauty of the arts, you know, being able to take something that, you know, maybe everybody's looking at it, but you look at it differently. You give it a different perspective. Whether you're a painter, whether you're a writer, whether you're a singer. You know, this is why when you listen to how people interpret the national anthem, you know, I mean, it's some people really feel it. You know, some people still go back to Whitney Houston at the Super Bowl singing, you know, the national anthem, and it seems like it's a song that, you know, it was a tavern song, but it definitely seems like it was definitely for Black people. you know, that whole thing. Is the flag still gonna be there? You know what I mean? You really have that faith, and so that comes out in terms of your singing. But this is what artists do. So I didn't just want to write about baseball. You know, I didn't just want to write, even though there's research in here, we know that Herb Score got hit in the face on May 7th, 1957, okay? One of the things which I had to do, because it's a baseball book, I had to make sure any baseball reference in here had to be exact for the guy who has a bag of peanuts sitting in the bleachers keeping score, you know? And somebody said, well, Ethelbert, you got it wrong, you know? He was out, you know? But that was a challenge in terms of putting this book together. But if you get this book, it's not just about baseball. It's basically about aging, okay? So in the beginning of the book, there are poems about, you know, me being young, enjoying the game in the South Bronx, you know, going to Yankee Stadium. But then the book takes us all the way to the end. And that's when we deal with, you know, the 7th inning. That's when we deal with Old Timers Day. So I'll just read you one short poem from the beginning and then a short from the end. And then I'll read you a baseball poem as a closing poem that's not in the book. The South Bronx. We lived in the land of broomsticks, stickball played between cars, manholes for bases. We ran past fire hydrants and caught balls near curbs. Now and then, someone smacked a Spalding to a rooftop, making pigeons fly, okay? Now, anybody who's like into like baseball history, you know that back in the 50s, there's a picture of Willie Mays playing stickball with the kids in New York. Okay, that's a very important image of, you know, because it shows you the players were not removed from their fans. You know, you would see them in the neighborhood, you know, and that is very important. And this is what if you talk about today, you don't want to grow up with a mask over your face and you're in the street. Just before this reading, you know what I heard? It's like it went by 3 or 4 times. In the midst of the sheltering and staying in place and wearing masks and gloves, I heard that little ice cream truck going down the street. And I told him, the ice cream truck? Where's that going? Can you see the little kids running out with their gloves? You know, if you're out there, if you're a little kid, right? First, you got to take your mask off now, okay? And then the whole thing about being grown up, the ice cream's supposed to melt on your hands, not on your glove. Flipping the M&M thing. That's the whole experience of coming in sticky. It's good, the cone is there, the ice cream's there, it's getting all over you, but you're a kid. And that's what you want to make sure. So I have this poem, and I had to check to find the spelling of the word Spalding. Those pink little balls that would bounce, And so this is further research just to get that. And that was something I said, wow, you don't see kids doing that anymore. Playing, in the streets where you would get, you go in the house and get a broomstick and break off the top and use it as a bat. So the book documents that. Now go to the end, and I'll read you this poem called Old Timers Day. The workers arrived today, bringing tools to change my home place. My place one day will no longer be safe. This is what aging does to the body. When things fail and the walls of youth become Berlin after the Cold War. Old age is coldness, bones reduced to everything that is fragile. How we break is how we suffer, is how we die, is how we dream backwards. The workers install railings and handlebars to prevent my falling, as if falling in love was still possible. I loved the Yankees when I was young, when I thought I could be a pitcher. Yes, I wanted my name to be called an Old Timers Day, after all my mistakes and errors. Call my name, God, after Jim Coates, Art Ditmar, Ryan Duran, Whitey Ford, Don Larson, Duke Moss, Bobby Shantz, Ralph Terry, Bob Turley, Louis Royal, and tall Steve Hamilton. Call my name, God, when I walk slowly from the dugout to wave at the crowd, tip my hat, and call it a day. Okay? Now, this poem begins with living. Oh, I'll go back. You see how none of us want to be in a nursing home, okay? You do not, wherever you are right now, that's where you want to be, okay? You do not want to be in a nursing home. So now you have, like Mark said, like helping seniors stay in their place, get your house. So my wife found out this thing where you can get, the railings and everything installed, okay? But that's also aware that you realize that you're aging, but you can't just hop out of the shower now. You need to balance yourself. So that's how this poem begins. But what makes this poem so effective, and this is me as a literary activist, I go into senior citizen homes, I go into prisons, okay, I go into shelters. I gave this book to a friend of mine here in DC, and her father was a baseball fan, older man, and he took the book and he's reading it, and my friend taped him reading, and you know what he did? He's reading this. He's a baseball guy, and he gets to his name. Call my name, God, after Jim Coates, Art Ditmar, Ryan Duran, Whitey Ford, Don Larson, Duke Moss. All of a sudden, the name brought back a memory. You see, and this is the beauty. If you are a writer and you are willing to take your work into like senior citizen homes and things of that sort, these poems, for anybody that's dealing with memory loss, becomes a very soothing way of helping people to remember, okay? And all of a sudden somebody says, oh, yes. Like one thing I discovered here in DC when I would go into senior citizen homes, everybody's Boston Red Sox fans. Like, what's up with that? But even that became funny because one story I always tell, and this ties in with Robert Pinsky when he was poet laureate of of the United States. I remember Lipinski answering a question about how he got into poetry. And he said, he liked in growing up like around the New York area, when you're on the train and the train goes to different stops, he would say Hoboken, Teaneck, those names. If you're a writer, you hear that. So for me, being a baseball guy, this is a Boston Red Sox, I'm out at, what's that little school out there? Madeira School out in Virginia, Middleburg, Virginia, where the girls learn how to ride the horses and stuff. And I'm out there, and this is a number of years ago, and I was out there for a reading, and they said, well, Mr. Miller, books have not arrived, but what you will do is that we'll have our nameplates, and we'll circulate the nameplates, and Mr. Miller can sign the nameplates, and then when your books come in, there we can put the nameplate in the book. So I'm signing nameplates, right? And this young girl comes up, and she says, her name is whatever, Mambuquet. And I stood up, I said, Mambuquet? I said, are you related to Bill Mambuquet? Oh, that's my uncle. I got up and I hugged her. I said, in a Joe Biden friendly way. I got up and hugged her. And I said, Bill Mambuquet, you know what I used to do? And I told her, when I was young with my friends, we playing baseball. We say, coming in from the bullpen, Bill, Mom, Boo, Kit. And I just loved that, and I didn't even know I would be a poet. I just liked, sounds and stuff like that. Give me a few limericks, but Bill Mambuquet, it's something that these names, and if you look at sports give individuals nicknames, Choo-Choo Coleman or people like that are, if you're a writer, those are workshops. Here's so-and-so's name and write a poem about that, because they're just very, very beautiful names. And that's something that when I was writing this book of baseball poems, I was drawing upon, experiences from life, doing research, but everything in terms of that. I've written a number of baseball poems since the book came out, and I end my reading with this one, which is called The Call Third Strike. When you first saw her, she was a red light in the corner of your eye. You watched how she walked, how she sat, how she spoke, and all the time you said nothing. Your legs froze, and then your arms, and then you turned your head away knowing the moment was over and she would never notice you. That's that thing where, you never want to be the last out of a baseball game, especially a championship game, and you get a call third strike, like miss the ball, swing and miss, but don't stand there and, feel helpless. Now, I'll take you into the writing process in terms of this poem. There is a line, I guess now because we went through rapid hip hop, of sampling. There's a line in here, actually the beginning, which is not my line, but because I was standing next to the poet who said, wrote the poem using this line, said, oh man, you can have it if you want it. And that was my friend, Miss Bolton, who had this love poem that he wrote to his ex-wife, and it was red light in the corner of her eye as I kissed her. I love that line. So that you see, when you first saw it, there was red light in the corner of her eye. I took that, saying that Amos is deceased, he can't do anything, but I like that line. And I think that says a lot. And this is the thing I underscore as writers, the relationship with other writers, one of the things which I always go back and look at is that, which we probably will get away from, is that when sometimes you look up and two writers have a lot of correspondence, a lot of exchanging of letters, one writer in DC who used to live across the street from me, who wrote the most beautiful letters, was the writer Ed Cox, and I'm always reading like these letters because they're not like today, like emails. When somebody sits down and writes a letter, especially a writer, it gets into philosophy, it gets into what you're reading, analysis. And if you can go through life, in fact, I'll put her on the spot. I have a very, 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 very beautiful letter from Myra Scarew when Myra left Washington, D.C. to go and head up Yaddo, and I feel that, I've been blessed in terms of her grace, you know, in terms of her influence on my life. But, you know, that was a letter, you know, that I filed that away, you know, because what happens is that you realize just how beautiful her writing is. So if there's somebody, for example, who's studying her poetry and her prose, you want to look at these letters, because you could say that these letters were beautifully crafted, you know, and it's almost as if somebody opened their spirit to you. And in that sense, you've been blessed by that person being in your life. So I just want to say thank you, Myra, for that. So I'll end my reading and stuff. I'll tell you this, in terms of anybody who does this in the future, one of the things that these types of readings creates a problem is that you can't read the audience. Okay, like for example, when I was organizing poetry readings, sometimes I was organizing readings for people who had never read, and they were like, okay, what do I read? You know, things of that sort. And you know, you want to prepare, but you also want to do like what I call, you know, in football, an audible. You look over and you see the defense, and you say, oh, well, I'm going to change the play at the line. You know, before I get up to the stage, I'm going to change because this isn't. And then, you know, I didn't really read really political work, because you want to be respectful, you know. If, for example, you know, there were children, you know, I mean, in the house and stuff like that, you know, you want to make sure that, you know, you're not looking at the screen, somebody, just mute that, you know. But what happens is that you don't have that interaction. And this is similar to when you hear somebody, LeBron James, saying, you know, I don't know about playing basketball with no fans. I need the fans. I play for the fans. And I think for many writers, you know, especially writers who are doing like spoken word and things of that sort, that interaction was you know, very important. Now, because I was not a spoken word person, I said, oh, I might like this because I'm not going to have anybody snapping their fingers after my poem. But then I did a reading a couple of weeks ago and everybody was doing this. You know? So I said, okay, I'll adjust to that, you know. But it is going to be challenging, you know. And I was talking to people about, you know, how this is going to affect what we were cherishing, you know, going back to like the beats and earlier, the small reads in the cafes. And this gets back to what I was talking earlier about intimacy. You know, we're going to lose that. Independent bookstores were small for a reason. You know, you could be close to your author that you liked. You know, you went up there and got that book signed and shook their hand, or just got moved, you hug your writer. And that's something that we're going to have to get back to. If not, there's going to be something that we lose. You know, and this is going to make us very, very like those bad science fiction movies that came out after we dropped the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and then Rodan popped up and Godzilla popped up. Yeah, it's going to be that type of thing following this. That's why I quote that myself. I say we're in the early days of science fiction. You know, where all of a sudden some finds an egg or something that the radiation has gotten to it. But if these things begin to change us, you know, as human beings, I think the first people who will reflect that will be the writers. And if it's in a bad way, we as writers will have to make sure that we don't lose this. You know, like Anne Frank, here's my diary, you know, and that's, we wind up being guardians, because it's definitely been a number of things lost in the last few years. And some of it has to do with language, decency, values. And so, you know, there's a lot that we have to restore, and as well as learn from. So I guess, is there questions during this format? So everybody's gonna be muted.
Thank you.
Ethelbert?
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Everybody's
Ethelbert?
Yeah, okay.
Ethelbert, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Sorry. Who's your favorite baseball player, and who would you like to see be the vice presidential nominee?
Okay. My favorite baseball player, if there's one player that I would like to meet, would probably be Ichiro. You know, I feel he'll be the first Japanese player elected into the Hall of Fame. I think that's extremely important. I felt that he was a person that brought a certain dignity to the game. And I felt I saw him play maybe 2 times. I went out specifically to see him. You know, I was the only person in right field with a Japanese people around me seeing camera. But I realized that was, you know, that doesn't come often. In terms of who I'd like to see to be vice president running with Biden, it would probably be Susan Rice first. You know, I put Susan Rice first. I put Harris second. I say that in terms of one, Rice has worked with Biden. Okay. I also look at going back at how the vice presidency has changed. Jimmy Carter changed it with Walter Mondale, and I think there's a certain partnership coming through what we're doing right now in terms of coronavirus. The only person I would put ahead of Rice would probably be Harris, because you're going to need somebody who knows how to navigate the hill. Okay, so like when you look at Obama, okay, Biden, you need somebody to go up there that can deal across the aisles and things of that. So that's why Klobuchar would probably get a nod. But you're also concerned about pulling somebody out of the Senate and having that seat, be one that, might be contested again. The same way if you took Elizabeth Warren, I mean, she had a problem trying to win Massachusetts. Okay, so you don't want to tinker with that, because you could be at one vote might be very important in the Senate. But I think Susan Rice, definitely, if you pick a person who could step in to be president, I think she could. I don't think Stacey Abrams, for example, could step up and be president. You say, it might be nice, but you need somebody who really is tough, who saw failed policies, like Susan Rice saw things failing in Rwanda. She's been very outspoken in terms of op-ed pages and stuff like that. So, I think that she would be definitely in the administration.
One other question too. Who's the ugliest baseball player who ever lived?
It's not Yogi.
He wrote a book called Playing Ugly.
Playing Ugly? Who would be playing ugly?
He played for Detroit. He played for the Indians.
Oh, play for Detroit and play for the Indians. But Denny McLeod, no, not the Indians, though.
Don Mossy.
Don Mossy. Oh, right. That's a long time ago, man. You Ohio nationalist.
Yes. You were great, Ethelbert. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dan.
Hello.
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 Hello. I can hear you.
Okay. This is Lauren Corelli calling from New York City. And I've just made a lot of notes. And what I like woodshedding, and I'm going to research that more, because that brought up some emotion in me.
Oh,
and
good.
I really appreciate the idea of that. And in regards to Richard Wright, I had no idea that in his later years he wrote haiku. And I find myself at nearly 70. Start really writing haiku. So John, I've loved, and it's been fairly recent, let's say maybe 5 or 6 years, that I learned how to write it. I couldn't pull it all together. So I really appreciate it, and I just made a list of names and make me want to. And did you say Elijah Cummings?
Elijah, yeah, I had, who died. From representative from Maryland, yeah. Because I had a reading, like the day that he had died, so I dedicated my that poem when I read it the first time in the public, to him, because I remember when he was a student at Howard University.
Yes.
So I felt, that there was a person.
I thank you for I'm sorry for interjecting, but I was just saying I thank you for mentioning his name, and Kobe Bryant and Sterling Brown, and I like your poem, Black Men Are Precious.
Oh, thank you.
And I want to say this one last thing. I'm gonna flip it a little and say this. Okay, I'm gonna dare to say it and just say it. What about a Biden and Bernie Sanders ticket, if he could convince his followers to support it? And I'll tell you why. But why? I mean, could anybody imagine that? And the reason why I'm saying that, because ordinarily, under different circumstances, I would support the possibility of there being a woman vice president. And I know originally he had stated possibly a black vice president, a female. However, I think because I was privy to a conversation, and I sort of thought about it, and I said because of the climate, the racial climate that we're in now, I think that would be, if he had a woman running with him, and I'm a woman myself, it would be an automatic fail. Because when I think of all of these guys, the country as it is now, that people don't want a woman there. They didn't want Hillary, and she's white, and they definitely wouldn't want a black woman. And I just say that because of, I'm just looking at the climate today, and now I think that they could probably digest two white men being there. But I think that we would definitely be counted out if a woman came.
I'll respond this way. First, it would hurt Biden after making a statement that he wanted to put a woman on a ticket to back away from that. Okay, so he has to be thinking about that. I think that he knows that African Americans played a key role in turning his campaign around. So I think, for example, if he was a big Klobuchar, there would be a little bitterness there. So you have to think about that. But then we have to always be aware of the motion of history. And this sometimes is the narrative that we sometimes buy into, like a woman can't do this and that. The thing about that is that for the last few years, we've seen a tremendous increase in terms of women in government. Okay. And that's a blue wave. If we were looking at Congress, when you look at how many women are governors, and then you go back to Hillary did win the election in terms of numbers, so it's not like they don't have the numbers, okay? And we've passed it. I mean, Sarah Palin was on a ticket, I mean.
No, I'm with I'm right. A woman, and I appreciate that 100%.
Right.
But like I said, this isn't my thoughts. I was privy to a conversation that was happening, and I walked away with that, and I've been pondering that for the longest. And like I said, right now, what I'm doing, I'm just putting it out there to get some feedback. To get some feedback. But I would love to see a woman. And they also, in this conversation, and then I'm going to end it right here. Okay. Right here. In the conversation, what I also heard someone say that, understanding what I just mentioned about the climate, that perhaps if all the women, if potential potential candidates united and said, look, it would be great if one of us could be vice president, if one of us, but what we need to do, let's all unite and just support this ticket. I mean, these are things I'm just throwing out because my major concern is just getting the evil that's there out. And that's the end of it. I'm just throwing out some ideas.
Sure. And one of the things I would say that's very important that we need to do, and this gets back to, I'll tie it back to poetry. We have to have a Whitman approach, to our country. And this goes back in terms of not dividing our states into blue and red, and I think maybe if there's one thing that can come out of this coronavirus is that we realize this affects the entire country. And that's very important, that we have to, be concerned about someone in South Dakota who's in a meat plate factory. We have to understand that. We have to be able to say, okay, this is what's happened to Native Americans in terms of their exposure to this, and get a real sense of what it means to be America. Like I'm always telling people, it's so important to travel south, is to travel west of the Mississippi, I mean, I went to Alaska and that changed my life, just that. And then the other thing that's very important for us as artists and writers, and this is very important, that we always have to be international. That the President of the United States, the person that we put in that office, is also a world leader. okay? A world leader that is not going to defund some of our global institutions, which needs our support and leadership. And so what happens is that that's going to be the thing. And then my problem with Sanders, and this is why I like playing, Sanders at times sounds like the other flip side of Trump. Like there's something there that he doesn't compare the compassion that you see with Biden and Obama and others, which I think coming after Trump, it's going to have to be somebody with that type of personality. Where all of a sudden, you know, they could go into, you know, like any state in the union. Somebody would disagree with their position on abortion or whatever, but when somebody just died or an earthquake, they can heal a community. You know, I mean, if I go back to like I think '84, you know, when Jesse Jackson was running for president, Jesse Jackson was doing really well because there were places that he went up in Michigan and stuff that when some of those workers were on strike, like maybe 2 or 3 years before he was running for president, he was there. You know, Jesse Jackson was there. And when nobody was thinking about them and he brought the cameras with him and people were happy about that. But you need somebody right now, first of all, to be eloquent. To be eloquent. Did you know what, when Obama endorsed Biden for a 12-minute little I said, what's going on? Oh, he's speaking in complete sentences.
Okay.
You know, I always tell somebody, and this is like an assignment. Say we're from Japanese or we're from Hungary. How do you translate what this guy's saying?
Okay.
You see what I'm saying? Something just in terms of people being eloquent, being gracious, is so important. I mean, I look at how when people go back to what it meant to be a statesman, okay, and there were people who were Republicans but they were statesmen. You know, they were not obnoxious. They would not use language, you know, that you didn't want your children to hear. Okay, and this is what we're talking about. Whoever has to put this back together is not just the economy. It's basically, you know, how do you restore, a certain decency and to the office. You remember before Trump got in and he called the White House a dump?
Yes.
You know, I mean, if you and I are out in Idaho and we win the essay contest to go to Washington and, you know, with the school's happy, the little town newspaper happy, and then somebody who didn't get the award said, oh, you're just going to a dump. You know, the White House used to be something that, well, I want to go there. Or you win your championship and he's got hamburgers for you. Cold hamburgers. You're at the White House and you say, how was it? Oh, I had a Mickey D. A cold who would do that? You see, and you talking about somebody don't want to come to the White House. I don't come to the White House for a meal, not no Mickey D's. You know, I just say that because it's not just running mates, like you're saying. You know, it's people that have to say, okay, how do I govern? How do I listen? You might remember when Obama went in, he said one of his skills was he listened. Okay, and that's something that is important.
I so thank you, and what I'm going to do, even though I was just privy to the conversation, I wasn't part of it, but I was there, and I just wanted to listen. So I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to contact these people and say, well, here's something that you need to consider.
Okay.
Because some people brought up, I was interested in Stacey Abrams. Yeah, that's who I was really interested in, but they were trying to convince, oh, no, you have to set that apart. But I so appreciate your response.
Thank you for participating.
Thank you.
Okay,
thank
many blessings. Stay safe. Okay.
Same to you, my dear. Thank you, darling.
Hi, Ethelbert, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, okay. I just wanted to, it looks like we're about out of time. We'd keep you here all night if we could. But it's been so wonderful hearing your poetry and your thoughts on all this. And I did have one quick question, if people don't mind, one more little. You've talked about how, and clearly in your work, spirituality as well as politics and culture and all that plays a big role. And I'm wondering how in your actual, practice of writing, do you have can you talk a little bit about how you sort of balance those things, how spirituality, especially, might play a part in their actual writing schedule, or?
Well, it starts my day. I mean, people who, for example, who follow me on Facebook, there's always going to be something by Rumi or something by Hazrat Inayat Khan, because those are the books I'm reading before I read the newspaper. So
Yeah.
basically what I'm doing is sharing that, to have that sense of centering. Okay, that's why I'm happy in terms of writing the haiku, because what I found is that was slowing me down. That was making me more aware of my surroundings, especially in terms of nature. I wasn't just writing the haiku, but prior to that, I was like, doing yard work. And I think I got that definitely from my brother, because my brother went upstate New York where they make the monk's bread. So I was very much aware in terms of, okay, how do I begin my day? Okay, and that sets the tone. Like I have a poem about, if you go outside, fix something that's broken. In a small way, you have repaired the world. Okay, and when my son was small, we would get up very, very, very early, and we would go to the park for where he would play basketball. But the first thing we did, and this would be like about 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock in the morning, we cleaned up the basketball court, for the other kids that would come in, the bottles and things of that sort, and we say, okay, we respect the game, and we're here first. Why have somebody fall on the glass or something like that? We're here. We don't have to wait for the park service people. We can do it because this is our court. This is sacred. And I was just beginning the day that way, and when I look today at my son being a coach, and listen to how people respond to him in terms of his leadership, it began there. And that's something that, many writers take pride in the writers that they have mentored and things of that sort. But I go back with my immediate family and I look at, my son and my daughter, and I feel like they did at least a good job there. No revision.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. It's just
Okay.
been a thrill having you.
Is that Phil
thank you,
there? Hey, Phil.
Hi, Ethelbert. How you doing?
Okay. Good to see you, Phil. I love you, Myra.
Thank you, Ethelbert.
Okay.
I'm thinking about Sterling when he used to make stand up in his living room until we could name the players of the jazz and blues players that he was playing on his phonograph. And also when I had him come to school back 50 years ago, and the students would line up for miles, and they were so thrilled to be with him. And thanks for the most beautiful reading. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
It helps us to live. It helps us to live.
Thank you. Thank you all. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Arnold. All right, take care.
Thank you.
All right, night. Bye-bye.
Good night. Good night.
Bye.
Good night.
Good night.
Night.
Good night, Carmel. Good night, Philip.
Good night. All right.